Hi, I'm Justin Pines, and welcome to Jewish Insights, where we're in part 2 of our series to prepare for the holiday of Purim. Last week we had Dr. Erica Brown with us speaking about the difference between exile and diaspora and where we are today. We introduced the idea of the Jewish calendar, the idea that the Jewish calendar is a spiral that goes in circles. Each year we return to each holiday, each Shabbat, each Torah portion, and it raises individual questions that go with that holiday or that Torah portion. You know, if we were doing this with the American calendar, the example would be Mother's Day, right? So every year we come back to Mother's Day, but we come back to Mother's Day as a different person. We might think about our relationship with our mother differently. Maybe our mother's not here anymore, God forbid, or maybe we're closer to our mother, not as close. We're having some moment to investigate our relationship and our appreciation for our mother. And those of us who wait for the morning of the Mother's Day, sometimes it doesn't come out as well as we might have liked. And those of us who spend maybe a month earlier starting to think about, how do I feel about my mother? How might I want to express that appreciation? How might I want to approach that day? It puts us in a position to get more out of that Mother's Day. And so we're doing the same thing with Purim. And when we look at the Jewish calendar, when we look at any of these holidays, we really need to ask ourselves 3 questions. The first question is to look at the holiday itself and see what it's saying to us. Say, what are the core questions? What are the core character traits? What are the core themes that are growing out of this particular holiday? That's part 1. Part 2 is this year, this particular Purim. What is my takeaway? What's the guidance that can be offered for the moment that I'm in this year? Not last year's Purim, not next year's Purim, not 1,000 years ago Purim, but this year's Purim. And then the third question is, having thought about the holiday, having thought about what's the guidance for this year, how do we bring that guidance into practice? It's not enough to kind of just have an idea in our head. How are we going to be different the next time? One of the rabbis that I follow very deeply, Rabbi Shlomo Volbe, who we'll talk about today, he always says that if you sit and learn Torah and you get up and walk away and you're not a changed person, you're not trying to be different in the world, it's as though you've done idolatry. You've turned Torah into an academic pursuit. And so anytime we're sitting to explore Jewish ideas, it's with the goal of taking it with us beyond the moment we're in right now. So what's our flight plan? We're going to do actually exactly what I just said. We're going to spend a few minutes going over what is Purim, what are the core themes of Purim, what are the questions raised by Purim. I'm going to use 2 other holidays, Yom Kippur and Passover, to kind of help us flesh out what Purim's about. And I'm going to make the case that Purim is a moment of focusing on the fact that we are a shared community, that it's a community that shares bonds, that we're trying to use rituals and practices which strengthen those communal bonds. And we're going to highlight the importance of that community during and after a crisis. Part 2 is going to be clarifying the guidance. And so the guidance this year, I would say, is that there was a growth opportunity for us around communal bonding leading up to the war. That certainly since October 7th, our response has been about community bonding and strengthening our community. And the third, our post-war vision, which people keep talking about, is not only about a political and security landscape, but also about the Jewish communal landscape. What does the Jewish community look like? And then finally, having thought about what is Purim saying to us, what's our guidance from Purim for this year, our third piece will be, how do we implement that guidance in our lives this year? And we're going to look at one core way to strengthen communal ties, in addition to the 2 mitzvot of Purim that I'm going to talk about, and that's acts of chesed, what I'll translate as empathetic acts of loving kindness. So let's begin. So let's talk about the Jewish calendar, the questions of our eternal tradition that we come back to every year. And let's look at 3 holidays to notice the ways that they each emphasize us sharing some sort of collective. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. And for this, I'm riffing off ideas that are first developed, as far as I know, in the Shalom Hartman Institute's Foundations for a Thoughtful Judaism, which is an amazing curriculum that I highly recommend. And one of the units in here talks about this idea. I'm going to riff off it a little bit and take it in a slightly different direction, but it's really what sparked this way of thinking for me. I mentioned before that I think Purim emphasizes having a shared community. But let's first look at 2 other holidays so we can understand the distinction. I'm going to start with probably the most popular Jewish holiday with the most popular Jewish rituals, which is the Passover and the Passover Seder. And so let's look inside, but the case I'm going to make is that Passover is about our shared story. It's about seeing yourself as part of the Jewish story. And so to look at that, I'm going to use Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon's Pesach Haggadah, one of my all-time favorites that I've been using for many years. I'm trying not to get any bread on it while I'm here. And I'm going to read the following. So here, this is from the Magid section, the storytelling section. It's literally storytelling. And this is what Rabban Gamliel says. Rabban Gamliel used to say, Whoever does not discuss the following three things on Passover has not fulfilled his obligation, and these are Pesach, matzah, and maror. This may be familiar from your Seder. My grandfather used to say Pesach, matzah, umaror. Right, those three things. We have to make sure that we tell the story. We have to talk about each of those three things at the Seder. Why do we talk about them? So it goes on. The Pesach sacrifice that our fathers ate during the period of the holy Beit HaMikdash. What is the meaning of this? It is because the Holy One, blessed be He, passed over our fathers' houses in Egypt. As it says, you shall say, it is a Pesach sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of Bnei Israel in Egypt, and when He smote the Egyptians and saved our houses. And the people bowed down and prostrated themselves. So step one, we use Pesach to remember that moment of passing over, this moment of God passing over our homes when He smote the Egyptians. And then we move to matzah. Matzah, this matzah that we eat, what is the meaning of that? It is because our father's dough did not have time to rise before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and then redeemed them. As it says, they baked the dough that they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of matzah, for it had not leavened because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. This is probably one of the most well-known things. I don't know if everyone knows why the Pesach sacrifice, but certainly the idea of eating matzah on Passover. It evokes this story, this idea of rushing out. There's more to say about matzah. We'll get to that when we get to Passover, but for now, we'll use Rabban Gamliel's description. And then we have the maror. This bitter herb that we are eating, what is the meaning of it? It is because the Egyptians embittered our fathers' lives in Egypt. As it says, they made their lives bitter with hard labor, with mortar and with bricks, and with all manner of labor in the field. Whatever they made them do was with rigor. So we have these three moments, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. We're doing this ritual to evoke the story, to remind us that God passed over, to remind us that we rushed out of Egypt, to remind us that our lives were bitter. And then in the following paragraph, we say it's not only about remembering it, but every generation has to do this. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, it is one's duty to see themselves as though they had personally come out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim. As it says, you shall tell your child on that day, it is because of this that the Lord did all these miracles for me when I left Egypt. Not only our fathers did the Holy One, blessed be He, redeem from Egypt, but He redeemed us with them as well. As it says, it was us that He brought out from there, so that He might bring us to give us the land that He promised our fathers. And so I want to point out here that at the core, and again, none of these holidays are absolute. There's God in Passover, there's communal bonding in Passover, right? We invite people to our Seder and we move that in. But I want to argue that kind of one of the core, if not the core element of the Passover story and the Passover ritual of the Seder is telling that story. That's the night of the year where the Jewish people come together and we say, what's our story? Let me tell my children our story. Let me discuss our story with my colleagues. We're going to keep telling the story over and over again. So at the core of Passover is we have a shared story. Now let's go to Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, I would argue that we take a moment to focus on the fact that we have a shared God. If that word makes you uncomfortable, it makes me comfortable, but if it makes you uncomfortable, then maybe we have a shared sense of morality or a shared sense of absolute morality. Something about oneness, about absoluteness, not about relativism. And so for that, we're going to go to I think one of the most famous prayers, certainly sang in every Ashkenazic synagogue these days, which is Anu Amecha. Anu Amecha ve'ata Elokeinu, Anu Vanecha ve'ata Avinu. You get the idea? You got me to sing on TV, first time in my life. And so let's look at that for a moment. And if that's not your tune, I'm sure there are amazing other tunes out there. That's the one they sing in Eitz Chaim where I grew up. And there we have, this is a theme you see throughout, but it says the following: our God and the God of our ancestors, forgive us, pardon us, and grant us atonement. Here, by the way, I'm using the Koren Yom Kippur Sachs edition of the Yom Kippur Machzor. I can't recommend it enough. The essays alone are worth the price of admission, and as always, it's beautifully done by Koren. And it says, after saying, our God and God of our ancestors, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement, it says the following: for we are your people and you are our God. That's what I just sang. We are your children and you are our parent. We are your servants and you are our master. We are your gathering and you are our place. We are your legacy and you are our land. We are your flock and you are our shepherd. We are your vineyard and you are our keeper. We are your work and you are our maker. We are your bride, and you are our lover. We are your treasure, and you are our God. We are your people, and you are our king. We give you our word, and you give us yours. And so think about how this is different than Passover. The Passover Seder, it was, this is what happened to us. This is what happened to us. Let me tell you the story. We're eating matzah. We're eating maror. We're eating, we're remembering the Passover sacrifice, all as ways to remind us of the shared story we have. And now the language here is focusing very differently. Now this language is about what is the relationship between us and you, the divine. What's the relationship to us and the divine? And so we're going through all these metaphors to help us unpack, to help us relate, to look to side and recognize we're all in this together. The same way we all share a story emphasized on Passover, we all share a God emphasized on Yom Kippur and our relationship with that God. Okay, so we looked at Passover, we looked at Yom Kippur. Now let's get to our holiday of this month, which is Purim. And for Purim, I'm going to be using the Devash from Hadar, the Hadar Institute. We had Shai Held in the studio yesterday. We have the Hadar Devash edition of Megillat Esther. This is hot off the presses. If you don't have one yet, you should get one for this year. It's super reader-friendly and super children-friendly and goes alongside all of the amazing work Devash is doing with the weekly Torah portion, which my family enjoys every week. So Devash, let's look into the Devash Megillat Esther. And I want to look now at not only the rituals of Megillat Esther, but actually the way the Megillah describes how we arrive at those rituals. So before we get to the rituals, which are in chapter 9, I want to just back up for a second, because Purim is this time of crisis. It's a time of avoiding annihilation and protecting ourselves from those who'd come to destroy us. And like any crisis, unfortunately, it thank God, I guess, brings us together. And so let's look at that first moment of crisis, which is chapter 4 in Megillat Esther. And this is right after the decree of Haman goes out that he's going to try to annihilate all of the Jews. And we read the following. Mordechai found out everything that had happened. He tore his clothes, dressed in rags, and put ashes on himself. He went out into the city and cried a great and bitter cry. He went right up to the king's court because it was not allowed to enter the king's court in rags. In every province, wherever the king's law reached, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, they cried, and they grieved. Everyone put on rags. So you can imagine this moment. For the record, there's no reference of Jewish community before that. There's no, and by the way, Mordechai went to Shabbos dinner with these people. There's no, and everyone was at the JCC. There's no any reference to the Jewish community before this moment. This is the moment where the crisis happens. Suddenly we have Jewish community. Suddenly the crisis explodes, the decree goes out, and the Jewish community responds. And wherever the king's provinces reaches, there we have mourning, we have fasting, we have crying. We have this crying out. And of course, unfortunately, we can think about how that applies today. And then we kind of go through this back and forth where Esther wants to know why Mordechai is at the gate. Mordechai tells Esther what's going on. Esther expresses fear and concern. Esther says that she can't go before the king. How could she possibly go before the king? She hasn't been invited before the king. And it would be life-risking. And then Mordechai has his famous response. Mordechai sent this message back to Esther. Don't imagine that you alone of all the Jews will be saved in the king's palace. If you keep silent now, the Jews will be saved another way, and you and your family will be lost. And who knows if you became queen for this very crisis, or this very moment. Okay, so we have, and there are parallels here. I don't have to say them out loud. These moments of something's happened here. There's some sort of response. Esther, are you in or are you out? Are you going to step into the Jewish people and represent them in some way, or are you going to try to protect yourself? And then Esther sends the following message back to Mordechai. Go gather the Jews. Bring the Jews together. Create a community of Jews. The community of Jews in Shushan should fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 whole days. My servants and I will also fast. This is actually where we get the custom of fasting. It's called Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, leading up to Purim. Right, so Esther has this moment where Esther says to the Jewish people, we need to be a community. Right? Mordechai says, you need to step into the community, and she responds, it can't just be me. We need the whole community to step forward. Everyone needs to participate. Everyone needs to fast together. And so our first note is, there is no Jewish community in the story of Megillat Esther before the crisis. Then there's this crisis, and we have a response. We come together. The Jews are gathered. You know, we might have to put political pressure on certain Jews to say, hey, you need to step forward in this moment. You've been sitting in that position, the seat that you're in, you need to do something about it. But there's a response to the crisis. And then I'm going to yada, yada, yada the next 5 chapters of the Megillah. The story we spoke a little about last week with Erica, but I want to get to the part at the end where everything has been reversed. The poor, everything turns upside down. And suddenly, instead of the Jews being annihilated, the Jews have the opportunity to fight back and to attack those who are trying to attack them. And this is chapter 9, and it says the following. The 13th of Adar was the day for the king's decree to be carried out. It was the day the enemies had hoped to rule over the Jews, but the opposite happened, and the Jews ruled over their enemies. The Jews gathered in their cities, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to fight whoever wanted to do evil to them. No one stood in their way because everyone was afraid of them. All of the king's ministers and governors supported the Jews because they were afraid of Mordechai. For Mordechai had become important in the king's court, and his reputation had spread to all the provinces. Mordechai was becoming more and more powerful. The Jews struck their enemies with the sword, death, and annihilation. They did what they wanted with them. And then it proceeds to go through how they killed Jews in Shushan and beyond. They killed Haman's sons. Erica in her book points out that they killed 75,811 people during this time, if you add up what's written in the text here. Okay, so we have this moment of the Jews are under attack. The Jews come together. Those who are in position of power step up and help the Jewish people. And then the Jews have this moment where they are able to defend themselves against those who seek to attack them. But then something kind of unexpected happens. Okay, we hear the story of the Jews getting revenge on their enemies. We're told there is a day of joy, of celebration, because of their success. And then we're told the following. Mordechai wrote all this down and sent scrolls to the Jews in King Ahasuerus' provinces near and far. And now I'm still in chapter 9, I'm in 20 to 24 here. Mordechai wanted them to accept upon themselves to observe these days of the 14th and 15th of Adar every year, just like the 2 days of Adar in the story, when the Jews were at peace from their enemies, and when their sorrow became joy, and their mourning became a holiday. So that so far seems to make sense, right? We had this moment of near death. We defended ourselves. We succeeded. We are at peace. We feel joy. But then here's the sudden turn. He wanted them to make these into days of feasting and joy, so we should celebrate this. Suddenly, out of nowhere, sending mishloach manot to friends and matano le'evyonim. So mishloach manot is gifts to our friends, gifts of substance to our friends, and matano le'evyonim, gifts to the poor. Okay, so we have this kind of sudden, unexpected moment where we survive the crisis, we make our way through it, and Mordechai says, what do we do after we survive the crisis? Yes, we have joy, we celebrate the day, but let's focus on 2 things. We want to give gifts to our friends, and we want to give gifts to the poor. And I think, for me, what I hear in that is that something that we can very much relate to, which is that if we're trying to examine what it means to live through a time of Jewish crisis, through a time of attack on Jewry, and then, please God, a response from Jewry where they defend themselves and are successful. We have these elements, these mitzvot. I introduced them last week, the 4 M's. One was Megillah. The other 3 all seem to drive home how we might respond to crisis, how we might think about crisis. So the first is the mishteh, this idea of bringing everyone together. We hold our family tight. We enjoy our time with them. Mishloach manot, we go to our neighbors and we give them gifts. It's a moment of community building. And then matanot le'evyonim, this idea that we are going to take time and see who's poor, who's in need, what are the things that they need, and how can we bring them to them. And if you bring all these together, these mitzvot are saying something to us. They're saying we are a shared people. We are a shared family. We are a shared community. We are a shared nation. So Purim is asking us to say, when there's this moment of annihilation, when there's this attack on us, step 1, gather the Jews. Step 2, defend ourselves. But at the end of the day, when we think about what's the meaning of this, what's the big picture, Mordechai says, build your community. Invite people to your table to share a festive meal. Think of what your neighbors might need and bring it to them. Give gifts to the poor. And this is not just for that year, but it's every day forward from the time of Mordechai. And of course, it reminds us that we shouldn't have to wait for an attack to come together. But I remember all the years people used to say when you worked in Jewish education, like, oh, the Soviet Jewry crisis. Wow, that really brought the Jewish people together. We don't have a crisis to bring us together anymore. Like, we should never, ever, of course, be praying for a crisis. A crisis shouldn't be the reason that we come together. But Mordechai is showing us that, yes, when the crisis comes together, gather the Jews. Yes, defend ourselves and be successful in that crisis. But the takeaway, where we go with that, are these mitzvot. The table with friends, the giving and family, the giving gifts to friends, and the looking out for the poor. So we respond to anti-Semitism and to attacks on Jews by rebuilding our world through acts of kindness to our loved ones, through acts of kindness to our neighbors, and to acts of kindness to those in need. Okay, so we talked a little bit around what's the theme, what's at the center of Purim, right? We compare it to Passover. That's our shared story. We compare it to Yom Kippur. This is our shared relationship with God. And now we're looking at Purim, which says we are a shared community, right? You know, the example they always give when they talk about the Holocaust is that, Hitler didn't decide who was Jewish or not Jewish. So whether we see ourselves as a global community or not, others see us that way. So it's up to us to wait to decide for other people to persecute us for being a shared community or for us to actually build that shared community. So our part one was, what's the calendar? Now our part two is, what's the guidance for this year? And certainly just going through it, it feels like so on the nose. Right? It feels like Purim is like a core holiday to share insight. And of course, every holiday, if you scratch a little bit, has wisdom for you, Jewish insights, you might say, for that moment. And Purim feels super, super relevant on this particular year. So what is our guidance? What guidance might Purim offer us this year? And again, I'm focusing on one lane. We spoke last week about diaspora versus exile with Dr. Erica Brown. This week, I'm focusing on these rituals of Mishteh, the festive party, Matanot le'evyonim, giving gifts to the poor, Mishloach manot, giving gifts to our neighbors. And I'll say the following. There was a growth opportunity for us when it comes to communal bonding before October 7th, if I could put that lightly. Yes, there are so many bright spots. It is amazing. In my community alone, I just think about the ways that people are invested in community. Someone has a baby, people are coming over to provide them with meals. Someone's sick, people are visiting them in the hospital. We have organized orgs. We have Hatzalah, so if someone has a medical issue, we have volunteer ambulatory people who are coming to help them. We have Chevra Kadisha, we have the people who spend their time quietly taking care of those who have died and preparing them for their funeral. We have Chaverim. You get a flat tire and you want help, you can call someone from the community. So these things are there. This is not to say that communal bonds weren't there at all. There's so many beautiful communal bonds in all different communities. But at the same time, if we look back at the events of this past summer, the summer of 2023, there was talk of civil war in Israel. People were at each other's throats. It was so hard to have constructive conversation. We weren't putting communal bonding first and then discussing ideas over that. And similarly, the American Jewish community. Right? It's no longer are you Jewish, it's are you a Democrat or a Republican? Who are you voting for? People are making their circles, their loyalties, their shared community is deeply around politics and sometimes putting our people to the side. And perhaps, I don't know, I'm sure I've done this, I'm sure others have done this, perhaps we take family for granted. It's very easy in today's era to take family for granted and to not appreciate that. And of course, October 7th changed all those things. Right, we're living in a post-October 7th time. We're living through history right now. We're living through Jewish history and global history right now. And we have those moments, those responses that are different. Esther's first response when she decides to come on board is gather the Jews. And we've seen this. We've seen this happening all over the place. The Jews are gathered. They're running on planes to Israel. There's cross-community connection happening in Israel right now within the Israeli community. We beautifully had Benny Ladome and Rabbi Chaim Pupko on here a few weeks ago talking about Englewood and Tenafly, New Jersey's Jewish community connecting with and forming a bond with Nativ HaAsara, the community there. There's a moment of the Jews gathering and strengthening their bonds. And when we think of the terrible tragedies that have occurred on October 7th and since, we think of those who have lost family members, those who have family members that are being held hostage, those who have family members who have fallen defending the state of Israel, or those who have family members that are currently on the front lines defending Israel, or are going to be called back to defend the state of Israel anytime soon. we can't help but take that moment to appreciate family, to appreciate community, to think about all these relationships, maybe the petty things we argued about before. Maybe we put them aside for a minute, because maybe we need to put our family, our community first. And then we think about Mishloach Manot. And we are literally sending packages to our brothers and sisters in Israel each and every day. I have friends running to make barbecues in the south to try to keep up the spirits of the soldiers. We have people running to hospitals and bringing gifts for people who are injured. Right? This crisis has brought out of us this element of shared community, of giving gifts, of giving so much tzedakah, of giving so much money to the poor right now and those who are in need, of thinking of people and bringing them gifts. And that's right now. But then we also have Mordechai in our ear, the post-war. What happens after the war, right? The day after, when Mordechai is focusing on what's next. And there's a lot of talk of post-war. Most of the post-war conversation right now is about politics and about land and about security and about economics. And those are super, super important. But I just want to flag for us that we also should think about what the Jewish landscape looks as far as our community. How do we take the community bonds and bring them forward? How do we take the model of Rabbi Pupko and Benny, of Englewood and Tenafly and Nativ HaSarah, and think about not 6 weeks, but 5 years from now, what do those Jewish communal bonds look like? And of course, I recognize that the war is far from over, and there is Hashem should protect us, and it should be safe, and people should be safe, and the hostages should return home, and there should be shalom. And so I don't mean to skip over that at all. That's super, of course. But I think we can start putting in place thinking about how our communal bonds are going to go beyond this war. And will we learn our lesson? It shouldn't have to take a communal crisis to bring us together. The Jewish economy shouldn't be driven by reactions to anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism. Right? We talk about, in healthcare, that we should put things in place for people to be healthy so that our healthcare system doesn't have to respond when things get bad. So it's the same thing. We need to invest in our Jewish community, in Jewish education earlier. People can't just say, I want Jews to be safe when they're under attack. They have to understand why they want to be Jewish. They have to understand what it means to be part of a Jewish community. They have to feel like part of that Jewish community. I'm a living version of that. My grandfather lost all his siblings and his parents. And so family is something that is so, so, so important to me. And at the same time, we shouldn't, God forbid, we should need the Holocaust to remind us of the importance of family. Benny shared his story on this network. He talked about losing 2 of his 4 best friends on October 7th. When I heard him say that, it destroyed me. I thought of my friends. I shouldn't need Benny's story to remind me to appreciate the close friends that I've been blessed with in my life. We have to remember past this moment to bring these messages with us. And so we've done step 1. Step 1 was, what is Purim asking of us? Purim is using the lens of some crisis against the Jewish people and talking about how we respond by strengthening community. We gather the Jews and we fight back, and when we're done fighting back, we invite people to our table. We give out gifts. We give gifts to the poor. We talked about how to apply that today, noticing maybe there were areas of growth before October 7th that we could have been doing better. Noticing the amazing and beautiful outpouring of Jewish community that has happened since October 7th. And then we also took a moment to think about what happens post-war. What does the future of Jewish community look like? And so we could stop there. I could say, let's build Jewish community. But I'm going to do the third piece, which I think is sometimes the most important, which is, even if we have an idea in our head, how do we implement that in our lives? I am a student of the Musar movement, the Jewish character development movement, and a student of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. I've helped Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg write a book on this, which God willing will come out in a few months. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says the following. He says, it is not enough for us to clarify ethical goals or idealistic goals or moralistic goals or mitzvot, Jewish laws. We have to develop practices to make them part of the people that we are. We have to walk out of the room with a strategy for how to do it better. And so here our question is, how do we strengthen communal bonds? And how are we going to strengthen communal bonds not only today, but moving forward? That's the question that we're asking coming out of Purim. And I want to offer, we could spend years on that. I want to offer one insight into that, which is from the book Alei Shor by Rabbi Shlomo Volby. I mentioned him earlier this evening, and he said the following. He has a book called, I mentioned Alei Shor, which is a book about Jewish practice, about Musar, about how to become the person that you want to be, right? For example, I don't want to be angry. That's lovely. What are the skills? What are the practices I'll build to make myself not angry? It's the same thing. I want to be able to dunk a basketball. What do I need to do to dunk a basketball? Okay, and maybe I'll never dunk a basketball, which is a deep Torah as well. But what are the exercises I might do? And so I want to focus on the lens of chesed, which I'm going to translate as empathetic acts of kindness. And I want to say that chesed is one way that we build community. We mentioned Mishloach Manot, we mentioned Matanot Levyonim, we mentioned Mishteh, all of those mitzvot. And I think embedded in each of them is an element of chesed, of empathetic acts of loving kindness. And so we could spend weeks talking about chesed. I just want to offer a couple ideas to help us think about chesed as we go out into the world again. Let's just start with Psalms, Tehillim, a favorite of mine, where we read the following: Olam chesed yibaneh. The world is built through chesed. So we could pass over that quickly, but I think it's something that is deep and real Torah. It's really saying something to us, which is, if I say to you, build the world, you might think about building buildings, you might think about telling stories, you might think about creating something in some way. The psalmist here is telling us that actually the world is built through kindness, both literally and figuratively. That acts of kindness is what build us, and it ties back to what we're talking about. You build the community through acts of kindness. And so keeping that at the forefront of our head, that every act of chesed, every act of empathetic, loving kindness is a way of building our world. And now with that, I want to take a moment to just clarify two words that are common in Judaism. One is chesed, empathetic acts of loving kindness, and the other is tzedakah, which I think coming from the Christian language is charity. And the rabbis lay out beautifully in Tractate Sukkot, Masachet Sukkah, on 49b, the difference between these two things. They say as follows: in three ways, gemilut chasadim, acts of chesed, acts of loving kindness, is greater than tzedakah, or charity. The first is that tzedakah is accomplished with money, and gemilut chasadim is accomplished with one's person or money. And so practically speaking, what are we saying there? So tzedakah, you write a check, you give money, it's money. But you can do an act of kindness for someone with or without money, right? You can do an act of kindness, you help someone, walk up a flight of stairs. There's no money transacted there. You're helping them without money. The second way they're different is that tzedakah is for the poor, and gemilut chasadim is done for the rich and poor. And so again, the target audience here is expanded. It's not strictly the poor when you're talking about tzedakah. It's gemilut chasadim. It's the idea of you can help anyone. You could do an act of chesed for the most rich, powerful person on the planet. Everyone is in need of empathetic acts of loving kindness. And then finally, tzedakah is done for the living, while gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, is done for both the living and the dead. I referenced this earlier. But a core idea in Judaism is taking care of those who have deceased from the moment that they passed. And so taking care of their bodies, preparing them for burial, the funeral, the burial itself, all those elements are ways that, you don't write a check or send money to someone who has unfortunately passed, but you can act in ways of empathetic acts of kindness towards them. Okay, so we're getting into chesed here. We said that chesed is at the core of the mitzvot, of the commandments of Purim. And we said that it starts with the big picture, Olam chesed yibaneh, keeping in our mind that we build the world through empathetic acts of loving kindness. And then we said, in case we were confused, there's tzedakah and there's empathetic acts of kindness. Tzedakah is only with money, only for the poor, only for the living. Chesed is with money or without money, is for the rich and for the poor, and it's for the living and for the dead. Now that we have a sense of what we mean by chesed, I want to introduce what Rav Volby says is the very first step. Before you do any empathetic acts of kindness, this is the step you need to do. And he's kind of riffing off two psukim, two sentences, I guess, two verses is the right word, from Parshat Re'eh, which is in Devarim. And here I'm using the Saperstein edition of the Art Scroll Rashi Torah with commentary here, which I also love. A lot of memories with this over the years. So it says in Parshat Re'eh the following. Ki iyeh v'cha evyon me'achad achecha be'achad sharecha ba'artzecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach lo ta'ametz et levavcha lo tikpot et yadcha me'achicha ha'evyon. This is one of our core verses for the idea of chesed. It says, if there shall be a destitute person among you, of one of your brothers in any of your cities, in your land that Hashem your God gives you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shall you close your hand against your destitute brother. And then it says, Ki fatoach tiftach et yadcha lo, va'avei ta'avitenu dai mechasro asher yachaser lo. And this is interesting language. Rather, and this is Art Scroll's translation, rather, opening, you shall surely open your hand to him. And lend, you shall surely lend him enough for his lack, that which is lacking for him. So Rashi, as Rashi often does, says, what's going on here? How come we have these opening, you shall surely open, lending, you shall surely lend? And he says the following. The lend piece is that you should give him a loan if he doesn't want a gift. Shout out to the Hebrew Free Loan Society. Sufficient for his need. So here Rashi says, step one is you are not commanded to make him rich. Right? You give him what he needs as opposed to what he wants. And then he translates that what he lacks as even a horse to ride on and a slave to run in front of him. So we have this kind of dichotomy. We say on one hand, we have to give people what they need as opposed to what they want. Someone's in trouble, we give them what they need, but then in the same pasuk it seems to say we also have to give them what they want. Even in those times, a horse to ride on or a slave to run in front of him. Right, so Rav Wolbe points out that what Rashi is saying is that sufficient for his need means no more than that. But when we say that which he lacks, there's no upper limit. The sky's the limit. Whatever he needs a horse, he needs a slave, he needs a rocket ship, we have an obligation to give it to him. So that should raise an eyebrow, and we'll get to that in a second. Rav Wolbe says the following, and this is he's the master of helping us build character traits, and here we're trying to understand how to build chesed. He says that just as people's temperaments are different, so are their needs. The very first step of doing any kind of chesed starts with, can you see and listen for what the other person is lacking? Can you clarify what the needs are? Can you actually write down on a piece of paper, this is what this person needs right now? He uses the metaphor of a spouse. Right? If someone was looking to get married, we wouldn't kind of say I found a spouse for you, go do it. Right? We would take all this time into account. We'd ask them a million questions. Oh, you like this and not that, and you're looking for this and not that. We would develop some sense of an understanding of what they're looking for and recognize that we're trying to find that one person for them. So if we're trying to find a life partner who's suitable, it's the same with all their needs on a micro level. And then he tells the following story. He tells us to imagine a wealthy person who has lost all of their money. They have to sell their house and move into a small apartment. All of their gold and silver, in his language, is gone. Nothing is there anymore. He's accepted that. But there's one thing that really bothers this person. This person used to drive to work every day in a fancy car, and now this person has to take the bus. By the way, I take the bus every day to our studio here, and I love it. It's been amazing. But this person has lost his nice car and now has to take the bus every day. And for this person, he feels humiliated every time he gets on the bus. He doesn't like other people seeing him riding public transportation or having to walk. So he's embarrassed to walk out of his home each day and to go to work and to come home each night. This person's never going to say to the community, I lost my money, can you give me a car? But, Rav Wolbe says, it's our obligation to be able to identify that of all the things going on, that's what's really causing pain for them right now. Whether or not we're going to go and buy them a car, that's a question of community priorities. Right? If there are people who need medical care, there are people who need food, then probably buying a car for this person is not going to be high up on the list. But in theory, if we had endless money, we would be obligated to fulfill the need of this person. We would clarify up front what's going on for them. It's not that they lost the house, not that they lost their money. It's this act of not being able to drive in a car to work is really bothering them. And he notices that we might have a strong reaction to that and say, really? Really, Rav Wolbe? And he says we have to learn this. Our first reaction to hearing the groaning of a formerly wealthy person, that he's struggling with walking to work is to be angry. Are you kidding me? We're all walking. We're all taking buses. What's your problem? How could you even possibly express that emotion? How could you even possibly say that it's bothering you, or that you're in a lot of pain because you have to go on public transportation? But Rav Wolbe says, it's our obligation to understand that for that person, that individual, this is what they are lacking in the moment. We have to do the work. Again, not of saying, here's a car, but can we just actually show up for someone in a way and say, I can actually articulate what's hard for you right now. And then we could decide if we're not going to buy them the car, we could comfort them in other ways. Maybe we offer to give them a ride. Maybe we give them hope. Maybe we try to help them. But step one is to just clarify the needs, and then we can develop a strategy about how to address those needs. And of course, we don't always have to fix stuff. I've learned, I think most people learn in marriage, that the idea is not always to fix, sometimes it's just to listen. But can we clarify? Can we clarify the needs of the person in trouble? And of course, there are so many different types of needs. Some people talk about their needs, some people don't even talk about their needs. So we have to feel, we have to get a sense of what someone's lacking. We have to go into the depths of another person. We have to really give them our attention and understand what's going on for them and check what they're lacking. So one person needs financial help, another person needs a job, a third needs guidance, a fourth needs healing, a fifth needs spirituality. We need to be able to identify this. By the way, I struggle with this in parenting all the time. Sometimes your children say something to you and you just hear it and you respond to keep it going instead of being pause. What does my child actually need right now? What's the request they're actually making of me, either in the words or not in the words? They're taking the time to say this to me, so something must be on their mind. Can I give them my focus? And again, we're nowhere near, we're not up to yet actually doing an act of chesed, an act of kindness. All we're saying here is, step one is, can you clarify the thing or the emotion or what's going on? What is a person lacking? And so the first step of chesed, if Purim is a time of chesed, Purim is a time of communal bonding, a time of doing empathetic acts of love and kindness to strengthen our community. Our first step of any act of empathetic love and kindness is that empathy, is to be able to identify the needs of the person we're serving. So let's just reflect on this for a second. Why is it so challenging sometimes to identify the needs of another person? So I mentioned this before. Sometimes we don't bring our full attention to really understand what someone's asking you. It's not just hearing the words in one ear, it's turning, focusing, making that contact with them. Sometimes we project. I do this all the time. Right? Someone tells you about something, you immediately think about how you would feel if you were in that situation, and you project onto them that what they need is what you would need in that situation. Right? So sometimes we're not paying enough attention, sometimes we project, sometimes also we don't want to hear. Right? We prefer that what they need is this thing. Maybe we talked about giving tzedakah versus gimut chasadim before. We prefer to imagine that what they need is the thing we want them to because it's easier for us or because it's what we want. We want to avoid the real thing. And you could think of so many examples of giving acts of kindness that are not based on the needs of another. The classic one is, the person who goes to a village and says, I'm bringing you clothes and I'm giving out clothes to a village that's poor, but then the person who makes clothes in that village no longer has a job. Right? So you think you're doing something to help, but you're really, you're causing trouble. I'll say one for me that really hits home was I was on the subway once, or waiting for the subway. I had an important meeting. They're all important in theory, right? That's what we think. I was waiting for a subway to arrive, and a woman came up to me, from behind, and said, "Please, sir, can you help me?" I did not look at her. I did not look up. I took out my wallet and took out a couple dollars and went to give it to her. And then as I gave it to her, or tried to give it to her, I looked up and she said, no. And then I realized she was having a medical crisis. She was not feeling well. She would ultimately faint. And thank God, everyone in the area helped her, and police arrived and ambulatory arrived, and she was okay. But it was such an obvious moment where I wasn't even there. I was not doing any chesed. Right? I heard a request and I was like, oh, let me just take care of this. I'm just going to give the money and move on. And I didn't for a second even look and make eye contact to see that this person had something else. I didn't even wait for a question. I didn't clarify what their needs were at all. And so as we think about reflecting on this today and what's going on in Israel and what's been happening, so certainly, and this has been a discussion, step one is clarifying what are the needs. What are the needs not only of Israel as a country and the Jewish people broadly, but individuals. There are people who are working so hard on WhatsApps and conversations to clarify this one person, what is their need, or this unit, what is their need, or this family, what's their need. Is it a hug? Is it financial support? Is it help on social media? We had Rabbi Pupko and Benny, and they talked about how it's not a financial relationship. That's part of it, but it's about two communities bonding, and it goes both ways. Nativa Asara trying to anticipate the needs of Englewood and New Jersey, Englewood and Tenafly, and the same the other way. Both sides of the relationship trying to anticipate and understand the needs of another as a way to strengthen their bonds. And I should say, there was interesting, I've seen a little bit on social media, people saying, no Mishloach Manot this year, send everything to Israel, which I think is so important. We need to strengthen and focus and continue to bring our focus to Israel. But it's also important for us to remember that there's community here. There are those in need here. We have to be mindful. We have to do chesed towards, for example, our students. And again, it doesn't start with, I'm nowhere near a college campus and I have an opinion about what should happen on a college campus. It starts with talking to people on college campuses, hearing from them, understanding, what are your needs? What are you feeling right now? How can I identify your needs? And then we could talk about how to address those needs. And not just broad North American Jewry, but also within our homes, within our families. Can we take that moment and focus on the need of that individual or our community? I remember just one story was, I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, my friend Dan, was working around the clock after October 7th. I don't think it was everywhere. I don't think he went to work. I think he spent 2 weeks just nonstop doing stuff for Israel all day, all night. And I caught him one time and I just heard him say that he was so burnt out. And I didn't, there are ways to support the work he's doing, and many people were doing that, but I had a different idea. I was like, I'm just gonna invite Dan to come over on Saturday night, just to sit with me, and we'll play video games, right? Which is maybe an unexpected direction to go in, but I felt like Dan needs an hour to not think about what's going on. Dan needs an hour to just enjoy himself and let off steam, and then Sunday morning when he wakes up, he'll run back and start sending bags again. And so it felt like for me, that was a moment where I was successful with chesed. I was able to notice a need of someone, and I was able to, in that moment, give them the thing that they need. The headline of all this from Rav Volbe, in terms of our first step of chesed, is to basically say, even if we can't satisfy every need of each person in our community, the goal is to be able to clarify each need in our community. So I'm going to give you homework. Here's my homework. It's Musar, so Jewish character development, we have to do homework. I didn't think of either of these. They're coming from our sages. Mordechai already gave us homework, right, as a way to build this muscle. And of course, like I said, unfortunately, it's being built reactively right now anyway because of what's going on October 7th. But as we approach Purim, to lean into the mitzvot, to notice the request that it's making upon us. Whether we've never done them before or whether we do them every year, can we approach the mishteh, the festive meal, with a chesed mindset, can I identify the needs of the people that are coming to my table, or identify the needs of the person who's hosting me? Right? It's the easiest for me to bring this thing, or can I actually try to anticipate what will make them happy? Number two, mishloach manot. Can I do it in a way that I am connecting with my neighbors? I know I always share, thank God we live in a big community, but you, myself included, you run around town and you bring your mishloach manot, you ring the doorbell, you wait 5 seconds, they didn't answer, let's go to the next house because we have to do 100 of these before the end of the day. Something's missing there, something's off. Right? That's not the idea here. The rabbis command us to do 2 mishloach manot. So maybe it's a moment where you deeply connect with someone and not just about running around. And then matanot le'evyonim as well. Can we be mindful on the day of Purim to give to the poor in a way that shows chesed, that shows understanding of their needs? So that's the mitzvot of Purim. That's a way to tap into what Purim is asking of us. And then another way between now and Purim is to use Rav Volbe's advice. Try once a day to, when there's something going on, just be able to say in your mind, or even better, just to write on a piece of paper, what are the needs of the person that I'm dealing with right now? Can I just clarify what they want in this moment? Can I be able to articulate that to myself? If you want to articulate it to them, that's fine. If you want to act on it, that's fine. That's a different thing. But just step one is, can I be in the habit, once a day, can I articulate, This is someone that I live with. Maybe there's an argument, maybe there's a request. This is someone I work with, someone in my town, someone in my synagogue, someone in my JCC, someone on my campus with me. Someone in Israel, can I just take a moment and articulate what they need? And my friends who work in sales, they do this all the time, right? They're going to a meeting, they've spent hours researching what the other side might need, and they want to show how they can add value. And so can we get into that habit on our own? Can we clarify the needs of another? So let's review. We look to the calendar to see what are the questions, what are the themes raised by this holiday. There's an eternal tradition, there's a spiral, and we're coming back to Purim. Not the person we were last year, not the person we'll be next year, and not the community we were last year or the community will be next year. This year, this version of us, this community. And we looked at the other holidays. We said Passover reminds us that we have a shared story. Yom Kippur reminds us that we have a shared relationship with God. And Purim reminds us of our shared community. It emphasizes rituals and practices which are meant to strengthen these community bonds. And it also highlights how to strengthen community bonds both during and after a crisis. And it maybe implicitly says, let's try to have those community bonds before the crisis next time. Having thought about Purim as a holiday, then we say, what's the guidance for this year? What's the guidance for Purim of 2024? And so again, we find ourselves under attack, like in the Purim story. And again, we must defend ourselves and stop our enemies. Fortunately, our community is coming together. The Jews are gathering, in Esther's words. Unfortunately, we realize that it has taken the October 7th attack to bring us together. And so some of the Torah for this year is our vision for post-war. It's not only political and security, which are so important, but it's also how do we envision a Jewish landscape with a stronger communal bond across denominations, across political lines, across communities? How can we make sure we don't have to wait for another crisis in order for ourselves to be strong and together as a community? And then finally, we implement this vision of our learning from this year. We implement how to strengthen community both now and in the future. And we looked at chesed as a core way of strengthening community bonds. I translated chesed as empathetic acts of loving kindness. And I shared that the psalmist teaches us in Tehillim that Olam chesed yibaneh, the world is built through acts of kindness. One act of kindness can build a whole world. And when we start to do chesed, when we focus on it, when we try to give to the poor, we try to take care of our neighbors, we try to connect with our family members, the first step, according to Rav Volbe, is to start by asking ourselves, what do they need? Can I bring my empathy muscle? Can I clarify what this person wants? And so whether it's in Israel, it's our friends, it's those in need, we have to start with this exercise, clarifying what the other person needs in our homes, in our communities. So as we prepare for and reflect on Purim, this year, this Purim, we appreciate that once again, our enemies have brought the Jewish people together. Purim reminds us that it's not only our job to defeat the attack, but also to build up our communities, to build the world through acts of kindness, through chesed. And if we're going to do that, chesed starts with being able to identify the needs of the person you are trying to serve. Wishing all of you a Chag Purim Sameach, a Freilich Purim, a Purim filled with joy and shalom. And we will continue our series on Purim again next week. Thank you.